All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our RBT practice exam series where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Serena loves playing an arcade claw machine where she sometimes wins a stuffed animal after a few tries. Sometimes it will take 2 or 3 tries, and sometimes Serena will try 6 or 7 times and receive nothing. What type of reinforcement schedule is most represented in this question? So we're looking at a simple schedule of reinforcement. And for the RBT exam, you're going to need to know 4. We need to know fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. And when approaching reinforcement schedules, we're going to break them down into 2 parts. First, fixed versus variable. In other words, is the requirement steady or is it changing? And then ratio versus interval, where is it based on responses or time? In Serena's case, she plays this claw machine where sometimes she wins after a few tries, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes 6 or 7, sometimes she gets nothing. So this is very similar to how a slot machine might work, where you can try and try and try, but when you win is unpredictable. The reinforcement is always changing, or when the reinforcement is delivered is always changing. So let's look at a fixed ratio. A fixed ratio indicates that reinforcement is based on responses, which in this case, that's true. Serena gets reinforcement based on the responses she gives, not an amount of time, but it isn't fixed because sometimes it's 2, 3, 6, 7. It's an average. It's not a fixed amount. So we have to look at B, variable ratio, to see what is represented in this question. It's based on responses, based on Serena's responses, and it's changing or an average. If you look at C and D, fixed or variable aren't relevant here because these are interval schedules. An interval is based on an amount of time. If this said after 15 minutes of playing, Serena receives a stuffed animal or reinforcement, that would be based on time. But it doesn't matter how long Serena plays, it matters about her responses. So the type of reinforcement schedule most represented here is variable ratio. A technician sets up at a table and begins working with their client. They present a red card to the client and the client says blue. The technician says, no, this is red. If the technician wanted to run this trial again with a prompt, where would the prompt go? Now, this might look like an interesting question because prompting seems pretty straightforward, right? But one of the biggest mistakes I see on the exam and in real life practice is the prompt being delivered at the wrong time. When you think about a prompt, think of it as a temporary discriminative stimulus or temporary SD. The prompt is temporarily going to evoke the behavior you want to see. So if we have this technician who wants to run the trial again with the prompt, and we know that they present the red card, which is the SD or the instruction, and the client says blue, that's the response, where do we want the prompt to go in the next trial? A, before the red card is presented. Well, you don't want to present the prompt prior to the SD or before the SD. We want the prompt right after the SD. So our chain should go SD, prompt, response, consequence. That's how it should look if you're prompting correctly. What about C, right after the client response? This is where the mistake is usually made. The technician or whoever's giving the trial lets the person give a response, and then the person tries to provide the prompt. The prompt has to come before the response because the whole purpose of the prompt is to evoke that correct response. And then D, right after the corrective feedback. Well, that's way too late. At that point, we're ready to start a new trial. If this technician wants to run the trial again with the prompt has to follow the SD. In that case, it's going to be right after the red card is presented. A teacher introduces a concept using multiple examples, such as different types of magnets and various surfaces where magnets might stick. Later, the students correctly identify magnetic objects at home and in other classrooms without additional instruction. Which phenomenon explains why the students recognize magnetism in these other untrained environments? So let's think about this. This is more of a complex question, but we're just going to attack the question and it's going to be okay, right? We're trying to figure out why the students recognize magnetism in untrained environments. In other words, students can walk into the kitchen and pick objects that are magnetic, or they can go to their friend's house and pick objects that are magnetic. How are they able to identify these different stimuli? Because they were taught different types of magnets and surfaces by their teacher. And then when they go home in other classrooms, they can still do that. So, one, they're generalizing, right? But what type of generalization is occurring? A stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization is where a response occurs in the presence of multiple stimuli. We're able to generalize a response to multiple stimuli and situations. And that's what's happening here. The students can correctly identify magnetic objects, which is the response, in the presence of all these different stimuli, even though they were untrained. The students have engaged in or demonstrated stimulus generalization. Response generalization has to do with multiple responses in the presence of one stimulus. But in this case, the response isn't changing. We're correctly identifying objects and we're generalizing that skill to all these stimuli, even if they were not explicitly trained. C, maintenance. Maintenance has to do with a learned or taught skill continuing. These skills were not trained. If the skill is not trained, we're not going to typically think of it as maintaining. And then D, differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement potentially is what the teacher used, but again, the question is asking about how the students can recognize magnetism in untrained environments. So maybe differential reinforcement is playing a part, but it's not going to be the best answer, and there's not enough information to support picking D as our answer. The best answer here is stimulus generalization. This response of identifying magnetic objects is generalizing across these different stimuli, even when untrained. The Bellagio fountains in Las Vegas are one of the most popular destinations for tourists walking around the Las Vegas Strip. The fountains are set to go off every 30 minutes during the day, so tourists often show up on the hour or on the half hour in order to see the fountains. What type of reinforcement schedule does this resemble? Okay, another reinforcement schedule question. Let's approach it the same way as the first question. Is it fixed or variable? And is it based on responses or time? In this case, we're looking at the fountains, and they're a popular destination. Tourists go to see the fountains. They want to see the fountains. Seeing the fountains is the reinforcement. The fountains are set off to go off every 30 minutes. So if the fountains go off consistently every 30 minutes, is that fixed or is it variable? Well, that's going to be fixed because we can predict it. It's not going to change. We know when it's going to occur. So we know it's a fixed schedule. Now, do the patrons or the tourists receive reinforcement based on their responses or time? Well, it's going to be based on time. It doesn't matter how often they go look at the fountains or what they're doing in between that 30-minute time period. It makes no difference. It's not going to make the reinforcement come any quicker. They've got to wait a certain amount of time no matter what. So we know it's fixed. We know it's based on time. What schedule does it resemble? We look at A and B. Those are both ratio schedules based on responses. We know we're not going to pick those. This is based on time. So we look at C, a fixed interval. We know it's not changing. We know it's interval. C looks right. D, variable interval. Well, it's every 30 minutes consistently unchanging. It's not variable. The type of reinforcement schedule we're looking at is fixed interval. Joe, a behavior analyst, explains to you and the client's parents that an extinction procedure will start tomorrow. The plan is to withhold reinforcement when the client says, I do not want to take a bath. How often should the extinction procedure be implemented? Easy question here. The question is simply asking, how often do we want to implement extinction? And the answer is as close to 100% of the time as possible. If you're going to be doing extinction, we have to make sure everybody interacting with the client is also using extinction. Extinction is not effective if we only do it some of the time. So if we want the plan to be withhold reinforcement when the client says, I do not want to take a bath, we need to be doing that as much as possible. So A, according to the reinforcement schedule, we don't implement extinction based on a reinforcement schedule. B, at least 50% of opportunities. That is way too low because that means maybe 50% of the other time extinction isn't taking place. And all we're doing is changing when that reinforcement is occurring. C, at least 75%. It's better, just still not good enough for extinction. And then D is close to 100% of opportunities as possible. Yes, extinction needs to be done 100% of the time or as close to as possible. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard,